What if the pet store employee ringing you up has no idea that the two fish in your bag are going to try to kill each other by Thursday? That's not a joke. That's the business model. Petsmart sells fish by the tank, not by the relationship, which means nobody at the register is checking whether the two species in your bucket are compatible, only whether they're both in stock. Today we're going through the pairings Petsmart will sell you side by side, ring up together, and never once flag as a problem, and exactly why putting them in the same water is a countdown, not a community. Subscribe if you'd rather find out now than find out when you're missing a fish. Ever wonder why the Betta always gets sold completely alone in its own little cup, separate from every other fish in the store? That's not a display choice. That's a warning label Petsmart isn't required to put into words. Two male Bettas in the same tank will fight. And it's not posturing, it's to the death, which is how the species got the name Siamese fighting fish in the first place. But the mistake people actually make isn't buying two males. It's buying one Betta and one long-finned community fish, like a guppy or a fancy-tailed goldfish, assuming that because the Betta is calm, it'll ignore anything that isn't another Betta. Bettas are territorial and instinctively attack anything that resembles their own flowing fins, which means a long-tailed tank mate can get mistaken for a rival and shredded over a period of days, not minutes. So the damage looks like disease long before anyone connects it to the Betta. Even the safe version of this, an all-female Betta sorority, only works under specific conditions. Nobody explains at checkout. Experienced keepers recommend a minimum of 4 to 5 females, ideally introduced at the same time as juveniles from the same source, so they're already used to each other, in a tank of at least 10 to 20 gallons with plenty of visual barriers like plants and decor. 2 or 3 females in a small space just means the group picks one fish to bully until it's gone, since there aren't enough targets to spread the aggression around. Even in a well-run sorority, keepers are advised to watch for the difference between normal pecking order chasing and sustained, damaging aggression toward one fish specifically, which means a sorority isn't a set-it-and-forget-it tank. It's an ongoing management project most impulse buyers never signed up for. Petsmart will happily sell you a single male Betta and a single female Betta as a pair if you ask. And that pairing isn't a community. It's a fight that hasn't started yet. Ever notice that the fish that live in the same aisle at Petsmart don't necessarily live in the same water? Goldfish and almost every starter tropical fish sold a few tanks over are a mismatch built into the store layout itself. Goldfish thrive in the 65 to 75 degree range, while the tropical community fish Petsmart racks right next to them. Tetras, mollies, guppies need 75 to 82 degrees to stay healthy. Split the difference, and you get a tank that's too warm for the goldfish's metabolism and too cool for the tropical fish's immune system. So both sides spend their entire life mildly stressed, instead of either one being comfortable. Temperature isn't even the bigger issue. Goldfish are exceptionally messy eaters that produce significantly more ammonia per fish than most tropical species their size, and tropical community fish have a much lower tolerance for ammonia swings than goldfish do. So, the tank mates goldfish get sold next to aren't just living in the wrong temperature, they're living downstream of a bioload their bodies weren't built to handle. There's a version of this that seems like a workaround. Keeping goldfish warm at true tropical temperatures, so the range overlaps. Experienced keepers who actually do this successfully point out that it comes with a catch nobody mentions on the sales floor. Warmer water raises a goldfish's metabolism, which raises its bioload even further, meaning the tank now needs bigger and more frequent water changes, just to stay stable, not fewer. The goldfish looks fine through all of this, because goldfish are famously tough, tolerating a genuinely wide range of conditions that would stress out almost anything else in the store. The tropical fish sharing that water are the ones quietly losing the fight, and they're doing it slowly enough that most owners don't. Clock the goldfish tank as the reason their tetras keep dying. Ever wonder why the angelfish in the display tank looks completely peaceful next to fish a third of its size? Give it time. Angelfish are cichlids, and cichlids are predators, with a simple rule for what counts as food. If it fits in the mouth, it's a candidate. Petsmart sells juvenile angelfish, roughly the size of a quarter, right alongside neon tetras, And at that size, the two genuinely can coexist, which is exactly the trap. The angelfish everyone brought home as a peaceful community centerpiece keeps growing up to 6 inches tall and 8 inches long as an adult. And somewhere around the 3-inch mark, its mouth becomes large enough to inhale a neon tetra whole. Reports from experienced keepers describe neon tetras vanishing from a shared tank within 24 hours. Once the angelfish crosses that size threshold, and it's not aggression exactly, it's an adult cichlid encountering something snack-sized and reacting the way cichlids do. The fish store sold you a compatible pair. Your tank is just going to age out of that compatibility on its own schedule, and nobody at checkout tells you there's an expiration date on the friendship. Ever seen a clown loach just lying on its side at the bottom of a tank and assumed it was dead? That's actually normal clown loach behavior, but here's the twist. It happens far more in loaches that were bought and kept, the way Petsmart sells them, which is one at a time. Clown loaches are obligate schoolers, meaning they don't tolerate solitude the way a lot of other fish can. They need a minimum group of 5 of their own species to feel secure, with 8 or more being ideal for the fish to actually stay out in the open instead of hiding. A single clown loach dropped into a general community tank as the interesting bottom fish spends its life reclusive, stressed, and hiding, which weakens its immune system over time in a species that's already notoriously prone to itch, one of the more common and more contagious diseases in the freshwater hobby. The part that makes this a genuine Cohab trap, and not just a loneliness issue, Petsmart sells these fish as roughly 2-inch juveniles that look like a perfectly reasonable single addition to a 20-gallon community tank, without mentioning that a proper school of 5 or 6 adults needs 125 gallons or more, and that the fish itself can live over 20 years and grow past a foot long. Even keepers who do eventually buy more loaches to complete the school run into a compatibility issue of their own, since introducing new loaches to an already bonded group has to be handled gradually, or the existing hierarchy treats the newcomer as an intruder rather than a missing piece. You're not just buying one fish. You're being sold the opening move of a species that only functions socially in numbers. Most starter tanks were never built to hold, in a commitment measured in decades rather than months. Ever wonder why African cichlids get sold in a bin labeled Assorted instead of by species? It's because 2 fish from that same bin might come from completely different lakes with completely different water chemistry needs, and the bin doesn't care. Malawi and Tanganyikan cichlids need hard alkaline water, while a lot of the peaceful South American cichlids and community fish sold elsewhere in the store need soft, slightly acidic water. And forcing either species into the other's water chemistry causes chronic stress that shows up as weakened immune systems and stunted growth long before it shows up as anything dramatic enough to make an owner suspicious. Even staying within African cichlids doesn't solve it. Mbuna are rock-dwelling, full-time territorial fish that treat every inch of substrate as something worth defending, while peacocks and haps from the same general region are comparatively laid back, open-water fish with no real defense against that level of sustained aggression. Toss them into the same assorted 55-gallon starter tank, and the peacocks spend their life getting harassed by fish that were marketed as basically the same product because they came from the same color-coordinated bin. There's a second layer to the mismatch that never makes it onto the tank label. Malawi Cichlid aggression is normally managed through stocking heavily female to male, so a dominant male's aggression gets spread across enough targets that no single fish absorbs all of it. An assorted bin gives you zero control over that ratio since you're picking fish by color, not sex, which means a tank that looks balanced on day 1 can just as easily turn out to be 3 males and 1 female, a combination that all but guarantees one fish gets targeted relentlessly once a hierarchy forms. Ever wonder what happens to the community tank once the Oscar you bought as a 2-inch juvenile stops being 2 inches? Oscars get sold in general tanks next to mollies, tetras, and other small community fish because at juvenile size, they genuinely look like they belong there. Oscars are also famous for personality. They recognize their owner, they react to you, and that charm is doing a lot of work to distract from the fact that they're a predatory cichlid that reaches over a foot long and needs a minimum of 75 gallons on its own. Any tank mate smaller than the Oscar's mouth at full size isn't a tank mate, it's future food, and Oscars grow fast enough that the small community fish sold alongside them at the store are frequently gone from the home tank within months, one at a time, with no drama, just fewer fish at feeding time. Even fish too large to eat aren't necessarily safe, since Oscars are known for redecorating their tank on their own terms, displacing heaters, uprooting plants, and asserting territory in ways that stress out anything, sharing the space that isn't built to handle a large, opinionated cichlid. Owners who try to solve the size problem by buying two Oscars at once as friends run into the same issue in a different shape. Pairs that coexisted peacefully for months as juveniles can turn on each other with no real warning once they hit sexual maturity. And by the time the aggression shows up, both fish are large enough that a fight does real, sometimes fatal, damage before anyone can separate them. Ever wonder why tiger barbs get labeled semi-aggressive instead of just aggressive? That one word is doing a lot of marketing work, and it's sitting on the shelf directly across from long-finned fish like bettas and angelfish that tiger barbs are hardwired to target. Tiger barbs are notorious, documented fin nippers, and long, flowing fins read to them as an invitation, not a warning. A tiger barb tank next to a betta or angelfish display isn't a coincidence of store layout. It's two labels that both say beginner-friendly, sitting 3 feet apart, while one of them is biologically built to shred the other. The fixed experience keepers use, keeping tiger barbs in schools of 6 or more, so the aggression gets redirected inward at each other instead of outward at tank mates, is almost never mentioned on the little care card clipped to the tank, which usually just says semi-aggressive, good for community tanks, and leaves it there. Ever bought a few guppies and ended up with dozens within a couple of months? Guppies are live bearers, meaning they don't lay eggs that might or might not hatch. They give birth to fully mobile fry roughly every 30 days, and a single pregnant female can store sperm internally and keep producing broods for months without a male anywhere near the tank. Petsmart sells guppies in mixed tanks without separating males from females, which means the starter trio you bring home is frequently already a breeding population before you've even finished setting up the filter. The population boom itself becomes a Cohab problem. A tank stocked for 6 fish can quietly become a tank holding 30 within a season, which crashes the bioload balance and stresses every other species sharing that water. Fish that were perfectly fine tank mates for 6 guppies and are now competing with 6 times that many for oxygen, food, and space. Newly born fry make the problem worse in a second way, since most community fish, including the adult guppies themselves, will eat guppy fry on site, meaning the tank rapidly turns into an unintentional feeding ground rather than the peaceful setup it was sold as. On top of the math problem, guppies' flowing tails make them a magnet for the same fin-nipping species, like tiger barbs, that shouldn't be anywhere near a betta either. So the same avoidable pairing shows up again under a different fish's name, just with a much faster growing head count attached to it. Ever wonder what happens when you put 2 fish in the same tank that were both bred to think they're the only shark allowed to exist? Rainbow sharks and red-tailed sharks look different enough to seem like a fun contrasting pair, and Petsmart frequently stocks both species in adjacent tanks, sometimes marketed together as a striking combo for a beginner setup. Both species are intensely territorial toward anything shark-shaped, treating the entire bottom of the tank as personal property, and red-tailed sharks in particular are documented as being completely intolerant of other shark-shaped fish sharing their space, full stop, regardless of species. Put one of each in a standard 30-gallon beginner tank, and you don't get a striking color contrast. You get 2 fish that were never going to share a tank with each other, even if there was nothing else in it, locked into a territorial standoff that stresses out every other bottom-dwelling fish caught in the crossfire. Ever notice how calm a Pictus catfish looks sitting on a piece of driftwood in the display tank, completely unbothered, like it's the most low-key fish in the store? That stillness is doing a lot of hiding. Pictus catfish are active nighttime predators with mouth sized for anything that fits, and Petsmart sells them in general community setups right alongside small nano fish like neon tetras and ember tetras that fit that description perfectly. The predation doesn't look like predation from the outside because it happens overnight, 1 fish at a time, with no fighting, no chasing, no visible injuries, just a slowly shrinking head count that most owners spend weeks blaming on disease or bad water, before anyone considers the calm-looking catfish resting quietly on the driftwood as the actual explanation. None of these fish are the problem on their own. A Betta by itself is a spectacular, low-maintenance pet. A pair of clown loaches and a proper school of 6 is one of the most entertaining things you can watch in a home aquarium. The problem is a sales floor, where compatibility isn't a question anyone gets asked. It's an assumption baked into which tanks happen to sit near each other, and where community fish on a label means we haven't had a complaint yet, not these two species are actually safe together. A 5-minute impulse purchase doesn't leave room for anyone to ask what a fish looks like at full adult size, what temperature range it actually needs, or whether it was ever designed by evolution to share water with the other bucket you're carrying to the register. Before you bag 2 species from 2 different tanks, look up whether they were ever supposed to share water in the first place, because Petsmart isn't going to check for you at checkout. And the consequences of getting it wrong don't show up on day 1. They show up weeks later as a slowly shrinking head count that gets blamed on everything except the actual cause. If you want to know exactly which individual species on that sales floor come with their own built-in problems before you even get to the Cohab question, check out the video on screen. I'll see you in the next one.